Hey there, everyone. So glad to have you here joining me today. I've been wanting to do a more kind of like casual off the cusp video. I've been recording some solo videos for a class that I'm currently teaching and releasing them, but this one is not for that purpose, but rather just to share an update and some things that I'm noticing and really just to say hi to all of you. It's interesting being on this journey. If you've experienced any sort of move or long-term travel, I'm sure you know the feeling of like, it's kind of weird that life just goes on without you when you've grown so accustomed to existing in a certain place. So this is the longest that I've been away from Omaha, Nebraska, my hometown, ever in my life. And so I'm definitely, seeing some of that and experiencing some of that. So I wanted to, in part, just come and say hi, and I hope everyone is doing okay. I miss you all. I miss talking to you all. I miss seeing how all of you are doing. So I wanted to share just a little bit about what's going on for us. We are still in New Mexico, so I'm coming to you right now from the beautiful, amazing Gila National Forest. This is a forest that really surrounds the area that we're staying at in New Mexico. And in fact, the spot where I'm at now, it's like kind of in a canyon area. It's a creek bed that I'm sitting in, actually. And it was like a less than 5-minute walk from where we're staying right now. So there's a lot of ground to cover in the Gila forest, and we've been to a few different parts, but so far this is just one of my favorites. New Mexico is called the land of enchantment, and I really see why from the place that we're staying right now. Even this, like, I've got my phone set up against this canyon as well, and this canyon is just like, it's red rocks, as you can probably see, but it's riddled with like these little ripples of clear crystal, very like quartz looking crystal, if you can see that, just kind of like spread throughout the walls of the cliff. This is kind of a better look at, they just run through in like these little strips. I've never seen land that looked like this before. I've never seen where, I'm way into crystals, but I've never really seen where they've come from before. So I can definitely see, why New Mexico is known as the land of enchantment. It's been really beautiful to be here. We left our kind of like first placement just over a month ago, I believe, and we're staying in a new environment right now for the time being. We'll be in New Mexico for a little while longer, though the path is kind of unfolding as we go. So it will be interesting to see where the road leads us. We do have an announcement. My partner and I do have an announcement about some of our next steps, but I'm going to make you wait on that, and I'm not going to tell you in this video. So if you're curious, you can check out our joint YouTube channel. It's A&, so A&D Ventures, but it's an ampersand instead of and, A&D Ventures on YouTube. So if you want to navigate there, you can watch for our announcement about some of our next steps. So yes, we've been here for several months now, looking like we're going to be staying a little bit longer as well as the winter approaches, and as we know, COVID rates continue to increase. One of the things that I mostly wanted to talk about in this video is a theme that's been coming up for me lately, and very much along these lines. And I want to talk about it because one thing that, if you know me, you know that I'm way into like the micro-macro connection. So that's social work lingo. If you're not a social worker, basically what that means is the micro is us on an individual level. The macro is us on kind of a bigger picture societal level. So when we're looking at things from a macro perspective, we're looking at things from a really kind of zoomed out, broadened perspective, not just sort of seeing ourselves as individual people who have no connection to the world around us, but instead, many parts make up a whole, and each of us on a micro individual level, we are part of this much bigger network, and that's ultimately what creates societies or social constructs or the ways that we exist in the world. So while we all have our own really unique aspect of the human experience, very often I find that our experiences are interconnected in some ways. And even if they look different from person to person, because of course we're all walking our own individual unique pathways, there are overarching macro level things that connect us all. One of the main themes I'm going through currently is learning about this concept of release. So I want to talk about it just because, again, I find that the individual experiences we're encountering, while they may show up differently for other people, very often are connected. And so, we can learn through each other through this way. We can learn through each other through sharing our experiences, through hearing other people's experiences. It helps us kind of get clarity on what's going on for us. And it helps us learn how to navigate situations as well. So for me, the theme of release has definitely been ongoing lately. Specifically because of some of the choices and the leaps of faith that my partner and I have decided to make in terms of launching out on this trip during a pandemic, not really knowing what to expect, but still having expectations about what we would experience, right? So I'm seeing release for me come up in a couple primary ways. Some of that is coming up through like emotional release, but a lot of it is coming up through release of control. And overall, it seems to have this theme to me of like releasing the old, releasing the path or the past, and specifically releasing the things that are no longer working for us. So we embarked on this journey. We knew where our first location was going to be. We were going to be doing work exchange, basically doing a certain number of hours of work per week in exchange for our basic needs of shelter and food being provided. And that's what we expected to do the full year. What we're quickly learning is that that's not really what we are wanting this year to be about. So part of it is like this release of expectations. Very often we don't know what we're getting into until we get into something, right? So if that's like a new job, for example, we might think like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the best place ever to work, and I'm going to be so happy, and I'm going to want to stay there forever, and I know exactly what it's going to be like. But of course, until we actually get into the day-to-day functioning of that job, for example, we don't really know what that feels like. Similarly with like human relationships, whether that's romantic or not, we don't really know what it feels like until we're in it. And although we might go in with the expectation or hold the expectation of like, this is going to be this way forever, it can actually end up causing us more harm in the long run when we sort of fight, when we fight to keep things the same way, as opposed to letting them be what they are and roll with the changes. So for me, one of the main themes of release has been playing out in this like release of expectation of just what this journey is going to look like. It's a tall order for myself. I am someone, as many of you as well, likely struggle with control. So I am someone who definitely struggles with control. I have a Taurus moon, if astrology is something you're into, if that tells you anything. So how that shows up for me is, I lived in my house for 14 years. I bought a house when I was, in my early 20s, and that was the only place I've ever lived since then. So for me, that was like a way to control my environment, right? I was able to be stable. I was able to have full and complete control over what my environment was going to look like on an everyday basis. Taking a trip like this, suddenly I'm finding myself having to release that sense of control over what my environment looks like, because this is really uncertain. We don't know where we're going to be staying 3 months from now, nor did we know 3 months ago where we would be right now. So I see themes here between my micro level experience of release of control, release of the past, release of ways that I'm used to living, and some of what we're going into this weekend in the future. So I've mentioned, we have this holiday coming up, and it's a holiday that is quite controversial. I mean, really, this holiday historically has been about celebrating aspects of genocide that were committed against indigenous populations here in this land. And, that's not explicitly what Thanksgiving is presented to be about, but those of us who know the true history of the United States know that that's actually what did happen. There was not peace between the white people who colonized this land and the indigenous populations who were here from the beginning. And some of our, patriotic expressions as Americans continue to reinforce these old notions of white European settlers who colonized this country being the heroes and the other people being, I don't know, people who were saved or somehow their lives are now better, or people who didn't know enough to create the systems and processes that we've created here. Regardless, we keep this like sort of clinging on to some of these old notions, these old memories of being in this country. And really what the function of release is that it allows us to grow and evolve. So the problem that comes, and I'm just using Thanksgiving as an example, there's a lot of examples we could pull from, but the problem that comes from holding on to, like gripping onto some of these old customs without reevaluation and critical reflections, these old behavior patterns without critical reflections, the problem with that is it keeps us stuck in the past. It keeps us from evolving. It keeps us from letting go of the old in order to make way for the new. So another way that I see this playing out right now is through our political systems. I mean, the Electoral College was invented in a time. Sorry, there's like rocks falling down the mountain. I want to make sure it's not an animal. So the political systems that we use for elections, the Electoral College, was invented at a time in this country when they did not have technology, right? Like, it was horse and buggy time period. Votes had to be collected through like physical copies of paper, physically collected, physically counted, physically tallied, etc. So the Electoral College, the political system we use for presidential elections in this country, is another example of, how we hold on to things that aren't working. And, we recently had this election, and regardless of how you feel about the way that it went, it is a interesting experience to watch patterns play out in terms of like who wins presidential elections in the United States over time. We've now had one non-white man who has been a president in our country's history, but beyond that, we end up with the same sort of representation, right? So not that the political belief systems are the same necessarily, but we have ended up with a very homogenous, a very similar template of a president every time we've had these elections. An older white male. That's what we've got again now. We've had some monumental change in that we now have the first woman vice president, the first woman of color vice president, the first Black vice president. So that's a sign of some sort of progress. But if we're asking ourselves, like, why can't we get out of this same pattern? Again, I think release is a major theme that we as a country are perhaps missing right now. In terms of when we hold on to old processes, such as the Electoral College, that aren't really reflective of the way the world works now, where we have technology, we don't need to collect physical copies of votes, we aren't sending people on horse and buggy to go to different communities to track how people are voting. When we hold on to these older structures that are no longer designed for the current reality we're living in, we cause ourselves problems. We keep ourselves stuck. So while, again, a lot of you guys are probably feeling much more optimistic about the election than perhaps you expected to, I think there's still this bigger question that needs to be addressed of, is the way we're doing this the right way for the design of the times now? And what are we sacrificing? What are we losing by clinging on to these old ways of doing? Democrat versus Republican, electoral process systems, celebrating holidays that are rooted in really problematic, ugly aspects of American history. Ultimately, the value of release is that it helps us get unstuck. It helps us, although it feels scary, it helps us let go of the things that aren't working. The thing that got me thinking about this was, experiencing autumn here in New Mexico, or it's beautiful to experience autumn. You can see there's still tons and tons of green behind me, But this is also a time when, of course, the leaves crumble up, turn yellow, orange, whatever, drop to the ground. And so we see nature embodying the things that ultimately we as humans would be better served if we moved towards that. So thinking about leaves, for example, like trees spend all spring, all summer developing leaves and blossoms, and this beautiful array that we see in trees and bushes and plants, etc. And then autumn comes and they let go. They release. They all the hard work they've put into these beautiful leaves they've crafted is suddenly done, and they drop it all in order to prepare for the next season, after going through winter, of course. So humans and nature move in very similar cycles. So for me, this got me thinking about this process of release, of the value and importance of, even if we very carefully crafted something and spent a lot of time and energy developing like this perfect, beautiful specimen, being able, when that thing is no longer serving us, being able to let go, being able to just drop it and recognize that there was value in the process, even if we're not forever clinging to the ultimate outcome. So the last thing I want to do before I go is I want to pull a card for you all. So if you know me, you also likely know that I am into tarot and oracle cards and things that allow humans to practice developing a sense of connection to their spirit, to their intuition, to their sensitivity. And this is a deck that my partner gifted me. It's called Earth Warriors Oracle. So what I want to do is I just want to pull a card, and I'll read you part of the message. The messages can be a little bit long, but I want to pull a card to just offer us like a little bit of energetic guidance at this time. Okay, so I pulled Uluka Vahini. She who rides the owl brings justice. There's a picture of the card. Beautiful colors in this deck. All right. So it reads, I am the goddess of karma, wealth, and balance. I come to correct adharma, that which is dark, unnatural, and against nature, life, love, and goodness. I redress the misuse of wealth and power. I enact divine justice and restore divine order. Trust in the innocence of your own soul and fear not, for I am ever watchful and my power brings truth. Divine justice is always brought to bear. All right, interesting. So in a reading, what this description talks about, it says, don't waste your valuable time and energy worrying about people getting away with things. It's not possible. Everything is balanced out by karma in the long run. If you feel down or depressed, take action immediately to reconnect to joy, healing energy, and vitality of spirit. All things are measured and metered by clear divine vision, and your job is to put your faith in the work of the divine whilst you tend to your own journey with trust and commitment. Okay, and a note about this deck, of course, it is a little bit more on the spiritual side. So if you resonate with terms like the divine, that's great. If you want to plug in, if you are someone who's more religious, if you want to plug in God, that's perfectly fine. If you are not into either of those terms, you can plug in whatever word works for you. So the universe, for me, a really important aspect of continuing on my micro level human individual journey has been learning how to zoom out, see these macro level patterns, look at society and societal processes and human evolution from a macro extended standpoint. And what that's really done is offered me a sense of faith, a sense of ability to look at the way that things are and understand that while they may not be perfect, while they may not be what I want them to be, while they may in fact be harmful and not good at all, that there's a bigger pattern playing out. There's a bigger reason to why those things are happening. And I can feel into that through, this intuitive side, this belief in the divine, this belief in a larger plan, or I can look at it through the lens of history too. So again, if you're not into so much like the spiritual aspect of some of these messages, how I ultimately taught myself up to open up to my intuition in more concrete ways was through looking at history and through understanding the trajectory of human experience. So really like a science-based understanding of bigger picture patterns. I mean, sociologists do this a lot. Sociologists look at bigger picture societal patterns over time and use them to put into context modern day issues and to understand, this problem, this circumstance, this awful thing we're seeing right now. It didn't just happen accidentally. It didn't just happen because like bad things happen randomly. It happened for a clear reason. We can trace the origins back and understand, here was a time in our history when we did this and people believed this and people were taught this. And now here we are playing out the aftermath 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years later. So all of that to say, I feel a lot of resonance in the messages of this card and some of what I've been talking about in this video in terms of, I think release is allowed when we're able to somehow have a sense of a bigger picture, when we're somehow able to make sense of why things are the way they are. So if I'm having an emotional response on an individual level that I don't want to keep having, being able to put that in a bigger picture context of my life. How did I learn this? When was I taught this? When did this first happen to me that caused me to feel this way? And when I look around at my life now, are the circumstances the same now? Do I want to continue holding this belief that I developed back then? Am I still in the same situation where I need that belief, where I need to feel that way, where I need to feel frightened or afraid or out of control or helpless? Very often, if we're able to put some of those feelings in context for ourselves, we can see that our current circumstances are hopefully different in some ways, and that can allow us to release some of the past stuff and in order to figure out how to move on from that, release some of the fear in order to figure out how to move on from that. So true on an individual level, if you're struggling with some emotional ties right now, emotional release, and on a bigger picture level too, again, it is really easy to look out at the world right now and find reasons to not feel hopeful, find reasons to feel overwhelmed and angry and like there are bad guys or bad people or, these evil forces at play that we have to battle and take down, when if we can zoom out from a larger picture, when we can look at societal processes and the issues of today from a bigger picture, we can understand that they're not random, that they're learned. And if there are things that we learned, then there are things that we can unlearn as well. So yes, again, don't waste your time and energy worrying about people getting away with things. I think that's a call to have faith in however that can show up within you. Even if it's just faith from gaining that bigger picture contextual understanding of why are things happening, why are these people, quote, getting away with something, that can help us release, that can help us move on. So that's a lovely card. Here it is again. All right, that's all for this video. Great to talk to you again, guys, and I'll hope to do more of these, and I hope to see you next time. So if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I think there might be like a little bell you have to hit to get notifications of newer videos, so feel free to do that. But if you're following me along on Facebook or whatever, know I'll continue to post these videos there as well. So see you next time. Have a good week, and see if release comes up as a theme for you. And if so, do what you need to do, spend some time with yourself, figure out if there's something that you need to work on releasing, a perspective you need to gain, etc. Sending lots of love to you.